Do you believe that it's actually possible to say, okay, I'll just automate everything and we don't need to care about or worry about FinOps culture?
I would say that I maybe agree partially.
Is there one thing that you think you got wrong when you first started doing FinOps?
The number one thing was really thinking that, I was going to come to people with data and they were really going to care about that data and run off and do something about it.
Do you think that it would make sense to apply FinOps to software or SaaS that is not consumption based, or would that be an overkill?
No, I think we definitely do. I think it's just different.
Welcome to FinOps in Action. I'm your host, Alon Arvatz. Each week, I'll sit down with FinOps experts to explore the toughest challenges between FinOps and engineering. This show is brought to you by Point 5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of FinOps in Action. Today, I'm very, very excited about our guest. I see her as a FinOps celebrity. The first time I saw her was on stage at FinOps X. Now, she actually started her career in IT, managing data centers and desktops. From there, she moved to become a tech lead for cloud infrastructure. And from there, decided to focus on FinOps. She is a frequent speaker going on stage all the time at conferences like FinOps X, O'Reilly, and many other conferences. I'm happy to welcome FinOps and software asset management lead at Under Armour, Amy Ashby. Amy, how are you doing today?
You doing well?
And Amy is one of the OG of FinOps. Is there one thing that you think you got wrong when you first started doing FinOps?
Oh gosh. Yeah. I mean, looking back, a lot of us are many, many years into this space. And I think, probably the number one thing was really thinking that, I was going to come to people with data and they were really going to care about that data and run off and do something about it. And, it's taken a lot of time to really, build more of a culture so that people actually do care. So I think that was really sort of eye-opening, when people aren't really used to having that sort of as part of their responsibility. It's just sort of out of sight, out of mind. And, why should I care about these numbers?
I think it's a shock to everyone that gets into FinOps, that people don't really care. Like, in the end of the day, it's not their money, it's not our money. So it's basically a matter of culture. Do you make an effort to get people to care?
I do, and I really try to sort of position it more like another metric that, there's just kind of even looking at observability, for example. When you're developing software, observability is just as important to help make sure that, things are performing and to help detect issues. And so I sort of treat costs as maybe any other metric and, just sort of try to get that integrated into a more day-to-day view and be something that can help aid, development or performance tuning or, just be another one of those indicators that we can see maybe early on or in correlation with other metrics. So that's how I try to approach it. Not so much of, trying to come with, you increased by this and really no explanation. I try to help people understand where and how the costs incur so that they're thinking ahead and then when they start to do changes or different things, then they will naturally reach out and say, well, I'm going to do this. And now that I know that there's a cost impact, now I'm going to come and ask you to help me figure out how much of an impact is it going to be.
I think that if we're going 15, 20 years ago, so also quality wasn't a metric that engineers would track. It was the QA department problem. Do you predict that 10 years from today, engineers would care about cost, and it will be just one more metric that they measure and track alongside quality and performance?
Yeah, I do actually. And I really do feel like, we're starting to see tools sort of converge different types of metrics together and really trying to put that in the path of an engineer. And I think cost is just another metric. Um, a lot of times that metric is going to correlate with others, and you'll be able to see that correlation, and or maybe it's a leading indicator. So you're going to see that maybe ahead of other metrics sort of spiking. So I really do feel like not only will we see that sort of part of normal everyday life, but I think we'll maybe see tooling maybe center around that more, um, surfacing that just like we do see in observability tooling today.
I totally agree with you. However, let me challenge you. I met at FinOps X, a very experienced, well-known FinOps leader, and he felt like he want to give up on trying to change the culture of engineers, and he want to just try to automate everything. Do you believe that it's actually possible to say, okay, I'll just automate everything, and we don't need to care about or worry about FinOps culture?
I would say that I maybe agree partially. I think we can do both. I think the goal should be automation. The goal should be to take as much action as possible without human interaction for some self-healing, or safe changes. But I think that especially when it comes to forecasting, I don't think we can really predict without inputs from the business. So I think, tactically, resource wise, based on usage metrics, we can automate a lot, but I don't think we can automate all facets of what we do in a FinOps practice. So we still need sort of that extra input from the business and teams as to, forward looking, and how are we going to forecast, and how are we going to anticipate that, an increase is not really an anomaly, but it's intentional. So I think there are some things we can automate and some things that will continue to be a practice.
I have to say that I agree with you very much. I think that even in the age of agentic AI, people will still manage the agent and give them guidance and help them fine tune what they're doing. So there will always be discretion. So in the end of the day, there will be this person that would have to be also aware to cost implications as he give guidance to the fleet of agents that do a lot of the work for him.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. And I want to, we talked about, engineers and driving engineering action and seeing FinOps as another metric or pillar like observability. Now, over the last 5 years, if you look at the status of the FinOps report, we still see waste reduction, engagement with engineers as the top priorities. I wonder, what do you think that it's still a situation? Why, 5, 6 years after we already have the foundation, FinOps best practices, and accumulated experience, people still struggle with reducing waste?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think first, us being in the community, we feel we're in it every day. We live and breathe it, and because we're sort of in that bubble, we think that everybody knows about FinOps. And I feel the community has grown so fast. We have people coming in that are at the very beginning of their journey. We have companies that have not looked. And so I think we're still going to continue to see, especially things around waste, be at the top of a list, because we have companies that haven't started. And then I think on the flip side, for places that have started their journey, maybe the scope of it was really focused. Maybe they're growing into other services and they just haven't gotten to maybe even get expertise on how to tune. They're still experimenting. Things coming out so fast. We have to figure out how they work, get them implemented, get some load there, and then figure out, okay, where are the places we can optimize? So I think some of that's going to continue to drive that up because as new services come out, in cloud vendors, people are going to leverage them and we don't know how to tune them yet, just like AI. Anything brand new, we have to experience it, figure out how to tune it, and improve performance. So I think waste is sort of going to be natural. I think there's always going to be waste. It's just over time and maturity, I think it'll improve.
And it sounds for you like waste reduction is one of the first thing you do when you establish a new FinOps practice, or when you now get into a new service that you want to apply FinOps to it. So do you think that it's really part of a crawl phase, or there are different aspects of waste reduction that would also be a good fit to walk and run?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's always step number one usually, because if you're starting out, usually the goal is to reduce spend as quick as possible. So that's naturally, the first thing to tackle. But, I think things change so fast and new projects get spun up. And if you're moving really fast, you don't always have time to sort of clean things up behind yourself. You're doing POCs and you're doing load testing and you're, trying to build something fast and you're going to go back and write some infrastructure as code later and maybe just driving things through a console. So I think there's always, until you get something really solidified and pushed out to production, there might be some trail of extra resources along the way, and you're not always, really strict about that maybe in the moment. And so I think there's always going to be pockets of places where you have to go and re-optimize. And, then if you introduce some sort of a new service, then you have to figure out where all those pieces are. Because sometimes you might not actually know where all the pieces are, and you got to go find those in order to automate deploying them and then obviously cleaning them up as well.
And do you see this waste reduction process or practice as something that you do like one time when you start dealing with it? Or do you see it as something that you have to take care of on an ongoing basis?
Oh, I think it's definitely ongoing. Definitely. Unless you have super strict governance and, a centralized infrastructure team, maybe managing resources really tightly. There's always going to be some level of experimentation, in your environments. And with, opening up access to people, there's always going to be waste. So I think it's always going to be an ongoing task. I think it's just that we can get smarter around how we identify that and how we manage it, and get it into our workflows so that it's just a common thing, regular maintenance of sorts.
And do you have any tips for our listeners on how to do it smarter, what to look at, what practices or processes to implement?
I mean, I think everybody is different. I actually get that question quite a bit when I'm talking to people that are in various stages. And I think really the biggest thing is organizational structure, and then just the size of your organization. There are some organizations that are small enough that, maybe you don't have to have heavy process. But then there's organizations that are so many layers and hundreds of, business units and thousands of engineers. You can't, one process that works for a smaller organization is not going to work for a bigger one. So, I think you really have to build the solution based on the size and volumes in your environment, and then figure out a process to sort of centralize that information. And that's where you can automate. That's where, gathering data around, cleaning up resources. There's so much of that out there. And, so many tools are picking up on what the cloud providers have. Really, it's just finding a way how do you want to ingest that data? How do you want to look at that? Is there a central team? Is it getting pushed out maybe as a task for an engineering team that owns the resource? I think it really varies, based on the size and complexity, and maybe even, how your FinOps team is structured. Uh, I've been in places where, there's DevOps engineers embedded in engineering teams, and they take on a lot of those tasks. Whereas another company might have just a centralized team. So it really is different for everybody. But I've seen all kinds of different solutions, whether it was sort of a DIY solution or, leveraging a multitude of different specialized tools. I think it's, just figuring out what fits best in your environment.
Yes. And you mentioned that sometimes it's being managed in a centralized way and sometimes in a decentralized way. Do you have a preference managing it in a centralized way or decentralized?
I mean, I think again, I've been in orgs that are sort of on both ends of the spectrum where there's, definitely a reason to be decentralized based on just the sheer volume of teams and having, engineers embedded within those teams to help sort of carry out and, help with governance, help with optimization is definitely an advantage. And then the centralized team can sort of help build out the governance and help build out, automation to supply, sort of the tools for the job. Um, I I rather like being in a centralized team, just because you have, your eyes on sort of everything, and you're doing a little bit of everything, which is what I enjoy doing. Being able to see that, but I can definitely see, reasons why you might go one way versus the other.
Yes. And I have to agree. I think it's nicer and easier to do it in a centralized way. But for many of our listeners and many enterprises out there, decentralization is just the reality. They've went through M&As, they have multiple detached business units, and it's just very, very hard to, put it all in one place and imagine it all in one place when there are different cultures, different people, different versions of Terraform that they use. So I guess for many, it's just the reality.
Yeah, exactly. And, while you might be able to feed the data to the decentralized teams, maybe you don't have as much, automation per se that is, pushed out to the edges. But, um, if you're at least able to feed the data, I've seen models where, different teams have different resources and they'll automate way more than another team will. And they'll be more engaged. And then I've also seen teams that use completely different tooling. So, in that particular model, I think you're focused as a FinOps practitioner or a FinOps lead would, be more so on making sure that they have the data that they need, but then letting them sort of choose the way that they're going to handle how they process the data, how they actually go and implement, changes and pick whatever method they'd like to automate things. So there's definitely, I think your focus shifts a little bit as to what types of things you're doing in that type of a practice.
Got it. And Amy, today, shift left is a big topic. Do you make efforts today to shift left and making sure that engineers or architects taking costs into consideration in the beginning of the process?
Definitely that has matured over the years. More often, there's more of a inclusion of FinOps or just cost in general in initial design. Not just cloud, but also any kind of software considerations. I think those conversations are taking place more often, and I think as practices grow, and just, what I've experienced, once you have people sort of in the mindset of being sort of cost conscious, then it naturally kind of goes all the way back to, okay, we're going to build a new thing and maybe it's going to be containerized. Okay, so we need to figure out what that's going to cost. And then maybe it's going to, use another service. So you get people starting to think about that sort of naturally, in addition to maybe even putting some formal governance around it so that you're getting in there at more of the design phase. Because a lot of times they don't even know necessarily what the architecture is going to look like. They might experiment a little bit. And I've been in several instances where those experiments, actually the cost was a driver for picking one architecture over another or using a particular service over another. So do I maybe containerize it? Do I go serverless? All kinds of different decisions. And sometimes cost is actually driving some of what the architecture is.
That's absolutely amazing to see. Do you feel that once we'll get to a world where architects are very, very cost aware and we have a lot of guardrails in place, do you think we'll get to a world where all of the waste is actually prevented from being created in the first place?
I mean, I think we can. Is that going to happen 100% of the time? Definitely not. But I think going into it, really thinking of, people always, spin up resources and then they always forget about backups and backup storage and how long are we going to have, data exist and what happens, once we exceed, such amount of data, we don't have an archiving strategy. Once you sort of put price tags on all of those things, I think it makes it easier to sort of bring it back to the beginning of the process so that you can plan, okay, what is our backup strategy? How long are we going to retain data? So I think we can definitely get there. And then obviously that will help prevent a lot of waste, but 100% of the time, for sure not. I mean, that's a goal for sure, but
I agree. I think it is also very hard to predict usage patterns. So a lot of these usage patterns, you have to see how they look in real life, in production, before you make a decision what is the best way to optimize. It's like saying that we can always prevent all bugs because we're deploying them in dev environments before. And obviously production environments behave a bit differently.
exactly. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy personally, is, I feel like we should be viewed as a partner in the development phase, especially once they get to any kind of load testing phase, so that we can just be another consultant. We can provide data to say, okay, here's what what kind of testing you did. Here's the cost impact. Here are the areas that it happened, to help inform. So ideally, it'd be great to be plugged in, at that level of development. And maybe if you're not personally involved, but at least getting them set up in a place where they can see the data for themselves, ad hoc, and, use it as another metric.
I agree. And Amy, today we're in the cloud plus era. And this is obviously a very, very hot topic as well. And you personally lately added to your responsibilities software asset management. I wonder, how did this happen? Was it your initiative? Was the request from above? How did it happen?
It really sort of happened naturally per se. So, my entry into it was really based around consumption-based SaaS applications. So, things like observability or things like tools that are really tightly integrated, whether it's, something as a service, a messaging platform, or, some other kind of infrastructure that's a service that's coupled with the application. And a traditional, sort of managing that software from a traditional sense, doesn't make sense because it looks more like, to me, I'm just calling them mini clouds because that's kind of what they are. Multiple SKUs, and they're consumption based, just like cloud. And really, it's very similar to what we do with cloud. And because a lot of these consumption based applications are an extension, really, of a lot of applications that we would develop, naturally, there's you have to know what the health is of applications you're integrating with. You could have a backup in one, and it could affect three others. And when you're having issues like that, it naturally affects the cost as well. So that's kind of how I got into it, was really sort of helping out with those types of applications. And then after working with those and not having a centralized software asset management program, it just evolved into, let's extend this to everything, not just consumption based. So that's sort of the path that I took to get here. I definitely, only worked with a handful of applications to start, but I think, as we're seeing the trend continue, more vendors are moving to a more consumption-based model. I've even seen it with users, where they're taking maybe a high watermark of users versus, specific user licensing. So I think we're just going to see this continue to evolve, just based on the way that these types of applications work and how we're integrating with them so much.
That actually reminds me of the episode we had here with JR, where he said that people think that we dictate from above that it's now Cloud Plus, but that's not true. The reality is that the practitioners, they're starting to do Cloud Plus, and we just give it a name, give it a title, and share with the community what's actually happening and how things are evolving. It sounded also for you, it actually was a natural evolvement from the work you were doing on the cloud. Did I get it right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think it really starts with, we have this spend in this software, and, you maybe have a contract for a year or maybe 2 years, and you put a bunch of money into that contract. And if it's a, consumption-based contract, maybe you're paying a lump sum all up front. Maybe you're getting billed monthly. But, unlike cloud, having FinOps as a function to sort of be the caretaker and sort of watch what we're doing, I think naturally what's happening is that something's happening just like cloud all over again, where spend is getting out of control. Nobody's watching it. And we're getting billed with overages, or, we're getting surprises when, on our next renewal for the software. So it's really naturally sort of evolved like cloud did, where we need an owner for who's going to help us monitor the consumption and usage within this software, much like we do with cloud. And because people are already familiar with what we're doing, and we have that skill set, it's a natural fit for those consumption-based models. And I think sort of, related to that then was, well, if we're going to go to the consumption-based models, well, then let's get involved in all of it. And it just sort of snowballs. And that's what I'm seeing, is that I think it really starts with not really having an owner. People procure the software, they use it, they leverage it, but who's actually watching? And then, we don't really, we're not really taking action until we're out of credits, or we're getting a bill. And then it's cloud all over again, where we're like, well, what's happening here? We have to go and, get some visibility into this, set up some alerting, and it's a very similar story. It's just a different different scope.
I agree. And do you think that it would make sense to apply FinOps to software or SaaS that is not consumption based, or would that be an overkill?
No, I think we definitely do. I think it's just different. Um, One of the talks I did last year, I touched on it a little bit, um, where now we're just using a different source of data. So even if we're dealing with user-based licenses, for example, versus consumption-based, we still have ways to actually plug in and monitor the usage. We have tools in the marketplace that do this. They have integrations into other systems to help figure out how are users interacting with the software to determine are they actually using this license. So we have different types of usage data that we can pull. And then the other data source that's new to this area would be the data around the contract. So, our cloud contracts are typically longer, more years, where software is typically a lot shorter. And there's other little pieces of data in those contracts that we're not used to dealing with. Like, does this software auto-renew automatically? Do we incur overages at different rates? There's other metadata in a contract that we also need to ingest and maybe set up some automation on or report on that we didn't before. So I think, managing even the non-consumption base is still we could still apply everything with the FinOps framework. It's just that the data is a little different. But we're still doing the same thing, right? We're still ingesting data, just different data sources and maybe different metadata that we're not really familiar with, or in a lot of cases, it's harder to get to if you don't have like a central place where all of your contracts are and information around your contracts. Now you have to think about how you're going to get that data ingested and what are you going to do with that data.
Make total sense. Amy, I feel like I can go like this all day. I actually prepared like 5 more topics to discuss with you, but I don't think we'll have enough time to cover all of them. And I want to make sure we also keep time to hear or learn more about you on the personal level. So today you live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, right?
I do.
How did you get to Milwaukee? Are you originally from there?
I'm from Wisconsin just in general. I've been in Milwaukee for almost 15 years. But I'm from about 3.5 hours north of here. So I've always been in the state of Wisconsin.
Okay, that's great. At our home, we're big fans of the Milwaukee Bucks. Definitely my son, which is pretty disappointing in the last few years, but
Right.
fingers crossed. And what do you like to do outside of work?
And just like at work, I'm interested in a lot of different things. I like to do different things. So I spend the bulk of my time outside of work as a musician. So I play upright bass and sing in a 3-piece band. We've got a couple albums we've recorded. We've been together about 13 years. So that's what I do on some weeknights and weekends. And that's where I spend a lot of my time. Otherwise, I like anything kind of game related, board games, card games, anything like that. I find pretty fun. And I have a vintage house and I like doing sort of remodeling projects, more restoring type of remodeling. So I dabble in all kinds of different things.
Yeah, you have a lot of them, a lot more than I have to say. And, are you performing on stage as a musician?
Yes. Yeah. We do anything from like a small club to, larger festivals and in a variety of environments. So summertime in Wisconsin, so we have really cold, snowy winters. So summertime is action packed with the nice weather. So almost every time we play, it's outdoors and at some event.
Very cool. And if anybody from our listeners wanna hear your music, is there anything online that you can listen to?
Yeah, our original stuff is everywhere, all the digital platforms. We're called the Incorruptibles. And so anywhere you stream music, you can find us there.
Nice. And Amy, do you have days where you miss the times before FinOps, where you were infrastructure tech lead, or you never look back?
Well, that's funny that you should ask that because I still find ways to just sort of go back and have that part of my role. So I really like to be as close as possible that I can actually get in on some troubleshooting. And funny enough, I recently had an experience where I was helping monitor a SaaS application, and we saw some pretty good increases in cost. And I brought it up to the team and I said, "Hey, I'm seeing this." And they started investigating, and long story short, it ended up, you know, being a performance issue on the cloud side. And so, that to me was pretty exciting that we were able to use data and troubleshoot an actual performance issue. So I still miss it, but I still try to find ways to maybe dig in a little bit more as I have time, just beyond the data to see, what kinds of things can we uncover.
Sounds like a very, very nice balance, I have to say. Cool. Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been really, really a fascinating conversation.
Yeah, again, I think we could probably go on for a couple hours on a variety of topics, but no, it's been good chatting.
Feels the same. And if anybody of our listeners want to reach out to you, ask some questions, learn more, what is the best way to do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way. Or if you're in the FinOps community, I'm also out there in that Slack. So those are the two best places.
Okay, guys, you heard her. LinkedIn and Slack. Reach out to her to learn a lot more. Amy, thank you again. I also want to thank our listeners for consistently listening to our episodes and learning more. I hope you had fun and find it just at least as interesting as I did. Amy, thank you again. This has been another fascinating, fun episode of FinOps in Action. See you next time. That wraps up another episode of FinOps in Action. Thank you for joining. For show notes and more, please visit finopsinaction.com. This show is brought to you by Point5, empowering teams to optimize cloud costs with deep detection and remediation tools that drive action.